Hey guys, it's Carmen again, and today for our devotion time, it's actually inspired by some of my students. For those of you that don't know, I am a teacher. I teach high school at a private Christian school, and one of the classes that I teach is sociology. And so we've got 2 weeks left of remote learning, and we're pretty much done with our sociology books. And so we've had discussions over the remote learning about music and relationships and the self-confidence versus being cocky, and how we should have confidence in God and not in ourselves, and love, and so on and so on. You don't have to know about all that, I guess. But in all of this week, they had their first major test, and the test was really easy because it was really just kind of figuring out what they had learned and what they had taken in so far while we've been in sociology, and just kind of getting a feel on have they grown spiritually, especially in the process of all of this. And so one of the questions on their test was, what is one thing that we haven't talked about yet that you'd love us to cover in our last 2 weeks of school? And one of my students' response was doubt. And I'm like, how perfect is that? So in the process of making a video for them and doing a devotion for them on doubt and lessons for them and stuff, I thought, why not jump on here on this channel and do a devotion here that I can share with them too, but I can share it with more than just my 3. This is my smallest but my favorite class that I teach. And so shout out to Archer, Rylan, and Grace, or as I like to call them, Archie, Rye, and Gracie. I miss you guys a ton, and so this video is for you, and specifically for my Rye, who was the one that said, why don't we talk about this? So I want to talk about doubt, and doubt in, I think sometimes we let Satan trick us into thinking if we have a question about something that we just need to question God altogether. But there's a difference between doubt and unbelief, and Satan's biggest trick is to take doubt into unbelief. And so I want to talk specifically first about some people who doubted in the Bible, just so you have somebody to relate to. And so if you go in Genesis chapter 18, we're talking about Abraham and Sarah. And you know the story of Abraham and Sarah. You know they were old people, and they wanted kids, and God gave them a child, right? And so we know that part of the story, but do you know what happened when God told them that they were going to have kids? So if we're in chapter 18 of Genesis, and I'm going to go to verse 10, and it said, the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. I like that. That's what I'm going to start saying now. I'm not old, I'm advanced in years. The way women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, and about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. That goes through verse 15. And so here's Abraham and Sarah. And so when we usually start to doubt God, it's in an instance when something is about to happen that God has promised that everybody around us says is impossible. They are older up in age, and all their friends have had kids and possibly grandkids by now. And they have this desire of their heart to have a child. And God said, you know what? In a year, I'm going to come back and she's going to have a son. And it's just like that for God. It's like there's nothing impossible, so nothing sounds crazy to him. But to them, it sounded crazy. Like, how are you going to tell me that I'm going to have a son and I'm 99 years old? Like, I'm going to be in the grave soon. I'm not going to have a son. And so she laughed, thinking in her human mind, there is no humanly way possible for me to be pregnant. And she wasn't wrong, because humanly there were so many restrictions and reasons why she shouldn't. But like the Bible says, what is impossible for God? And the answer to that is nothing. And so here's Sarah, who God has made this promise to, and immediately she starts to doubt that God is able to do this. And so her fix for this is, well, you know what? Okay, why don't you go and make a baby with my servant, and then we can have a child, and everything will be fine. And so she tried to do it her way. And of course, that's not God's plan. But how many times do we do that in our life, where we have something that God has promised and it doesn't come as quickly or on time like we think it should? So we try to do it in our own way. And we may succeed, because Abraham did get her pregnant, but that was Ishmael. That wasn't their promise. That wasn't Isaac. And so she wasn't letting God do his will in her life. And so eventually they gave in and they believed, and God gave them their child, and all of it come to fruition. But I'm thankful that God does what he says he's going to do in the end, but it's our doubt that keeps us from believing that. And sometimes it's our doubt that keeps us from seeing the promises of God. And so when I was talking about doubt and thinking about this lesson, and I said in the beginning that there's a difference between doubt and unbelief. And I actually looked up like the Webster definition of each of the words. And so for doubt, it says uncertainty or the lack of confidence. But unbelief is the absence of faith. Like, that's the Webster definition, the absence of faith. I never want to be without faith. But I found some Bible verses that kind of support what we're talking about today, and kind of reassure us on why we want to have faith in the beginning, and how faith is what crushes our doubt. And my biggest thing in this doubt is it's okay to have questions. It's okay to have weak moments where we're like, God, I just don't see how it can happen. I don't understand what you're doing. Those little moments of doubt are not unbelief. They're moments of being human. They're moments of having to step back and cut off our physical eyes for a minute and turn our spiritual eyes on and realize that God doesn't work the way that we work. And so, we all have moments of doubt. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I ever going to get into college? Are my parents ever going to stop fighting? Or, these promises that God, I know somebody that's prayed for their dad to be saved for years and years and years. And I'm sure, actually, I know there's been times where she's thought this is never going to happen, but God keeps reassuring her that his promises are true. And I think the reason that doubt sneaks in on us so much is because we have a timetable of when we think stuff should happen, of when we think that, I should be married by the time I'm 22, and I should have 2 kids by the time I'm 25, and I should have the job of my dreams right out of college, and whatever it is. And here we are, maybe 30 and not married, and so there's no kids. Then the dream job still is out there, and we're like, what in the world? God said that he had a husband for me, and I was going to have a family, and he promised me the perfect job. And God's sitting there saying, I am good to fulfill my promises. Just take time and lean in me. I have the perfect timeline. And then when God answers and gives us the promises that he's promised us, we look back and we feel silly for trying to intervene, and we see that there was a reason why he made us wait for it to happen. So I look at John chapter 20, and I know that you've probably heard people say, you're such a doubting Thomas, but do you know where that actually came from? The Bible? Because Thomas, when Jesus came back from the grave and he was resurrected, he was the one that was like, this can't be real. Is this real? In John chapter 20, we're going to read verse 24 through 28. And it says, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So some of the disciples had already seen Jesus at this point, and so they've come back and they're telling John about it. And so in verse 25 it says, so the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But his response to them was, unless I see in his hands the mark of nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. That's a really bold statement that Thomas has made there. He's like, you know what? I hear y'all saying this. I hear you. I understand that you're saying that, Jesus is back. But unless I see it with my own eyes, I'm not going to believe it. And then my eyes aren't going to be enough. I want to touch him. I want to see the scars. I want to touch where the spear went in. I mean, he was just full of doubt. But guess what? He was still one of his chosen 12. Even though doubt crept in on Thomas, it didn't make Jesus say, you know what, you doubted. You're cut off. I'm done. I want nothing else to do with you. And so verse 26 says, 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, Put your finger here. Okay, stop there for just a second. Then he said to Thomas, how dare you not believe me? No. Then he said to Thomas, your doubt has made me kick you out of my kingdom. No. Your doubt has kept you from being able to be called one of my 12. No. Jesus comes up to him and he says, put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. He showed grace, and he said, you know what, Thomas, if you need proof of me, then here I am. Touch it. I'm here for you. And that's what God says to us. He's not, every time we have a doubt that pops in our mind, he's not like, done with you. You're out of here. You should have believed in me wholeheartedly. He said, you know what? You've got a little bit of human in you. So let me show you a little bit more of me so that you know that I'm still working. And then in 28, it said, Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen yet, but believe. Jesus was letting him know that your faith needs to be a little bit stronger, Thomas. You know that I said that I was coming back, and you should have believed what I said. He's taken the time to let Thomas know, I love you enough to come and show you, but I need you to love me enough to trust me. So I want to go to Matthew, and we're going to talk about a different disciple who had his own moment of weakness, of doubt. And that's Peter. So we've all heard the story about Peter walking on the water, how he got out of the boat, but then he began to sink. In verse 31 in chapter 14, it says, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took a hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And then Jesus saved Peter and pulled him into the boat. There's a lot of easy ways to judge Peter here and be like, you know what, I would have never sunk. I would have walked on water and this, that, and the other. But you have to think about it. The disciples were all on the boat, and he was the only one that had the courage to step out in the first place. And so I feel like a lot of times doubt and fear go hand in hand. And if we can find the courage to step, the doubt begins to disappear. And the thing that I love about this story is if you read it and you pay attention to the wording, as long as Peter's eyes were locked on Jesus, Peter was fine. It was when he looked around at the seas around him that he began to sink. See, that's so real for us, and that's how doubt works for us. If we would just lock our eyes on him and on the promises that he's made to us and on in his word, then we would be able to literally walk on water. We'd be able to make it through the storms that people are like, how is she functioning right now? How is he getting through this? But it's because our eyes are locked on our promise. But the minute we begin to look around at the storms around us, at the troubles, at the life that we're in, that's when we begin to sink, and that's when doubt begins to creep in. And Jesus tells Peter in this verse that if you'd have faith, there's nothing that you can't do, which takes us actually to our next verse in Mark. And so if you'll go with me, we're going to go to Mark chapter 11. All right, so we're going to start at verse 23. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that, and you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father who is in heaven may also forgive your trespasses. So, okay, I love this verse because it seems so, when we read it literally, it seems like the biggest impossibility ever. Like, I'm going to walk up to a big mountain and I'm going to say, get out my way. And that thing's going to get up and walk over so that I can walk through. And that just seems like something we can't fathom. But when we think about it, when it says, whatever you ask in prayer, believe it and you will receive it. Like, that seems so easy, but we look at it as the same task as looking at a mountain and saying to move. And it's because we have doubt. We don't want to. We don't try. We don't sit around saying, you know, I don't really think that God is going to heal my grandmother. We say out loud, I believe God's going to heal my grandmother. But then the first time that we get bad news, we sit there and go, oh, well, I guess God's not going to heal my grandmother. Instead of saying, you know what? That's okay, because God promised that healing is coming. And so we look at it as this mountain that's impossible to move, and God's like, I told you. And so this is why it's so important to identify the promises of God. When God makes you a promise, write it down. Circle it every day. Continue to pray on it, because you need to remember that promise, because a lot of times, as we said earlier, those promises are not going to come into fruition immediately. We're a microwave generation. We go through a drive-through and expect our food in 2.3 minutes, or else we're going to get mad and we're not going to pull up and wait on you to cook some fresh fries. We expect it to be ready. And because of that mentality and this lifestyle that we've lived, that's how we go to God in prayer. Lord, I really need you to make sure that I'm married by the time I graduate college. Well, we're giving God a timeline instead of saying, God, wherever my future husband is right now, Lord, I lift him up to you, and I pray that you will prepare him for me and me for him, and that you'll draw us closer to you so that we can draw closer to him. So I've got one more scripture I want us to read together, and this is in James chapter 1, and it's verse 6, and it says, but let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of sea that is driven and tossed upon the wind. And so I know that doubting is just part of being human. If you're a Christian and you say you've never in your life doubted, I'm going to have to call you on it, because I don't believe that that's true, because it's just part of our human nature to have questions. And I know a lot of times when I was growing up, people would say, don't question God. You never question God. But looking back and reading the Bible for myself, and really seeing that all throughout the Bible, men and women of God question God. Jesus said, why have you forsaken me? That's a question. And it's okay. God would much rather us go to him and lean on him in those times and say, why? Why do I have to go through this? Why does this have to hurt so bad? Why do I have to sit here and watch all my friends get pregnant and me sit here wanting a baby and it not happening for me? God wants you to come to him with those things so he can say, trust me, I have a plan, and he can hold you and you can crawl up in his lap and just pour out your heart on him. That is his desire. That's what he wants from us. He's a big boy. He can take us getting mad sometimes, and that's what he so it's okay to have times where you're just like, you know what, God, I don't know what you're doing, and I'm hurting, and I just need some peace right now. And so what's not okay, though, is when you let your doubt become unbelief. We need to make sure that when we have doubts, we take them to the Lord immediately and say, God, I don't know why this is taking so long. I don't know what you're doing. I need you to show me that you're working in the situation, whatever it may be. Because if we just sit on our doubt and we start asking people these questions, then that doubt is going to quickly spiral into unbelief. And I don't believe God is ever going to do such and such, or move this mountain, or take care of this situation. And so doubt is okay. Doubt is human. Unbelief is when you have to worry. So I hope that this has answered the question that my class had, but I hope that it's inspired you and made you realize that doubt is a human characteristic that we have to overcome daily, but we can. And when God makes a promise, He's never broke a promise, and he's not going to start with you. There's nothing that's impossible for him. There's a lot that's impossible to wrap our mind around, but nothing is impossible for him. So I love you guys. I hope that this encourages you and helps you, and I'll be back with another video soon. Bye, guys. Another week full of outtakes, because yet again, Corbin can't read. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why is it when I try to read out of the Bible, that's when I have the most trouble? We have seen the Lord, but he... Sorry. Rewind. And then got when... the technical difficulties today. Say what so in why is this happening? I need coffee. Okay, let's try again. These bloopers brought to you by Carmen's inability to read.